right, everyone. Welcome back to the 3'n'D podcast. Here's your hosts, Gabe and Rashab. And I just want to lead off with an interesting topic. Every time I see the shows and stuff like that and perceptions, I see the Lakers are really in a free fall. Lakers are must see TV because of like the tragic mess they are. And that, Brooklyn sort of goes under the radar now. Like, where's Ben Simmons? Where's Kyrie? And it's like, oh, don't worry about it. For the playoffs, they'll be ready. And they Vegas still had them up to a couple weeks ago, had them as a favorite to potentially win the East. Obviously, now that's probably changed with Philly and stuff like that. But like Brooklyn never sort of gets the same kind of heat the Lakers do. And I wanted to dig in a little bit closer to it. And the more I look at it, like to me, they're essentially the same team, just on different sides of America. Like if you think about it, they're both in a play-in position. And if you're looking at the 12 seed, the seed that would knock them out of a playoff if they passed them, Brooklyn's about 6.5 games out. Lakers are 3.5. Not a big deal, but like they're definitely not where they should be. And it's just basically, oh, LeBron is getting his numbers, but there's no way he can do anything with this Lakers team. But everyone thinks, the moment Kevin Durant comes back, he has the ability to carry the Nets there. He just gets that benefit of the doubt now. And I just don't really see what's that much more different with the Nets. Even with their supporting casts, AD is an elite talent, but he's getting questioned. Well, what is he? He's not engaged. He's not performing to his level. And then Westbrook is just like a train wreck. He can't do anything. But on the Brooklyn side, same sort of thing. Ben Simmons, like, what is he? He hasn't even showed up yet. He hasn't played all year. But it's just like, oh, he's an elite defender. He's a great addition to the team. They're just getting the benefit of the doubt before seeing anything. And Kyrie, although he's much more talented than Westbrook, like, he's just not available or showing up to many games. So that has to be a knock on him as well. But it's just one of those magical problems that gets overlooked. And it's like, no, they'll be ready come playoff time. So I think the Brooklyn Nets really get graded high on the potential of having everybody healthy, clicking at an elite level, whereas the Lakers are getting, I guess, a bad rap. And the more I just look at it, like they just don't seem like they're that much different. Like they're essentially the same team. What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? That's an interesting take because I agree with you for the most part. So I want to talk about Kevin Durant a little bit and the LeBron James comp. I think, although you didn't compare them directly, in terms of their role to their respective teams, they both have a very similar role. They're the number one option. It's their job to kind of put the franchise on the back and carry them offensively, do their job in terms of putting the ball in the basket and being the focal point and being that, unstoppable force. So I think the reason why Kevin Durant gets more of a benefit of the doubt, and I remember seeing this somewhere, the Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant on the floor, I think they outscore opponents by like 8 points per 100 possessions. Now, that might be why media outlets are giving Brooklyn the benefit of the doubt, but you can't have KD on the floor all the time. He's an older player. I think he's 32 or 33, however old he is now. Coming off a lot of injuries. He hasn't really had a year where he's been fully healthy since that Achilles injury, and they're usually lower body injuries, which I think is a cause for concern. And in terms of the supporting pieces or your second and third options in Kyrie, Ben Simmons, and then Westbrook and AD on the Lakers, I think you hit the nail on the head. The uncertainty, the stubbornness, the personality issues. Both teams have their fair share of issues with their second and third guys, and there's not really any consistency in what you're going to get from your second and third options for either team, which puts a lot more pressure on LeBron James and Kevin Durant to do more than what they probably should be doing at this stage of their careers for their
Mm-hmm.
respective teams in order to win. So, yeah, like the more I look at the comp, the more I think they're in very similar situations. And that's not just for this year. Like you talked about Vegas having them at the same odds for this year or having the Lakers have, really poor odds, and but Brooklyn is still one of the favorites to come out of the East, which I think is absurd because you could have all the star power, and that might be because Vegas thinks that since Brooklyn's been killed by injuries all year, or call it an injury, but you could say killed by players missing games all year. Although for Kyrie, that's by choice. He could get vaccinated and sort of avoid that whole dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's what they're going off of in terms of your predictions for why or who they think is going to come out the East. But I think you have to look at it at face value. Like if the mandates don't change, there's always this, if this happens, then they're the favorites. But as of today, we don't know that any of that stuff. Like we don't know if the vaccine mandates are going to change.
Yeah,
So we don't know if Kyrie's going to be available. We don't know what Ben Simmons' situation is like. We don't know how he's going to fit with the team. We
and
don't
like
know what Kevin Durant's going to look like when he's healthy and back on the court. We don't know if he gets re-injured again. Like there's so many variables that to say that they're still the favorites coming out of the East, I think that's terrible. And like you said, there is a lot of similarities, and that doesn't just go for this year. And I'll get into it. You can go ahead and make your point, but I want to talk about what they're going to look like in the future as well.
yeah,
So you go ahead and finish, and we'll talk about the future in a second.
yeah. Just to add on that, I think it's pretty widespread that a lot of people think the East is much more exciting this year. They have much more competitive teams. Like it's not necessarily the Western Conference dominating, but just on the similarities with the teams, like Steve Nash, not necessarily a great coach. Frank Vogel, to be honest, I like Frank Vogel. I think what he did in Indiana was great, but like he's getting a reputation as not being a great coach. So we can just say across the board, like, okay, their coaching needs work. And even management's the same. Like we all look at Brooklyn, like that James Harden trade. It's like, oh yeah, Brooklyn got like a good haul for that for James Harden. But like, why were they even in that situation in the first place? They gave up like everything to get him. Like they're making boneheaded moves, and now they're playing damage control. And now the Lakers are just they've made a boneheaded move getting Russell Westbrook, and now they're going to be doing damage control in the offseason. Like it's just that's another similarity with them. So like just to me, they look like the same team, just on different sides of the country.
And they are like even for the future, and then this kind of what I wanted to get into. Brooklyn's cap situation, their pick situation for the future, neither is promising. Like I want to put it this way. Kyrie's got what I think 2 years left on his contract. He's signed until 2023, so only one more year. So he's this year and then next year, and then I think the year after that is a player option, or is it next year that's a player option? Whatever it is, Kyrie's got 1 or 2 years left, with one of those years being a player option. Assuming we can talk about both scenarios. Like you got KD until 2026, at which point he'll be 37 years old, turning 38 that year in September. You got Ben Simmons until 2025. He'll be 28 years old at the end of his deal, turning 29 that year, I think. And Brooklyn's tied for the second oldest age, like average age in the NBA of their overall roster, behind guess who? The Lakers. So you have a team whose future is highly uncertain, very similar to the Lakers. Like after LeBron's gone, they thought with AD that was going to be their guy, but is can AD really be that guy? You can't really count on him to show up. Like we're seeing all these question marks come up with AD, similar to Kyrie. I'm sure Brooklyn thought, okay, after Kevin's gone, we at least we still have Kyrie as an asset. He still puts on a show. He's still going to deliver for us. Is there any team in the league that still wants Kyrie after this contract? Like, if I'm Brooklyn, am I re-signing Kyrie to a max contract? I don't even know if he's going to show up. And all the other teams, forget about it. Like, this guy might retire because he wants to live in Brooklyn
Hmm.
with his family or whatever, and he doesn't even want to play for that city. You have no idea tomorrow if Kyrie wakes up tomorrow and says, I don't feel like it. I'm happy with my life, and I got more pressing issues outside of basketball. I'm retiring. If he's in a city where he's not close to home, that's not whatever his ideal playing conditions are for that point in time. You really don't know what you're going to get. So you have these two franchises who, when you really sit down and look at it, not just for this year, in the future, they're both in massive predicaments for each of their situations. And I don't really see a way out. Like for Brooklyn, what is it? If you don't want to re-sign Kyrie, does KD want to be there? Are you going to be forced to trade KD? Are you going to want to trade KD? Is that your best route to building a future or sort of rebuilding for that future? Because we know you can't build around Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons can't be the focal point of your team. We've seen that now, and we don't even know if he's willing to be the focal point of the team. He'll just leave if the situation doesn't fit his terms. So you
Yeah,
have a bunch of divas on these teams, and with LeBron, there's always that power struggle, the player dynamic. He's always got sort of his own agenda and what he's trying to accomplish in terms of Bronny, and he's got a whole bunch of stuff going on that just goes beyond basketball. And so now you have both these teams, like you said, the management teams here, they're not exactly in favorable positions. They're pretty much sort of at the will of their players, at the players' mercy, I'll say. And it's just not looking good. And like you said, the more you look at it, the more you start to see that these two teams are just, they're peas in a pod. They're just Western Conference and Eastern Conference versions of each other. And I don't think the future is particularly bright for either team. I know if I'm if I was a Brooklyn fan or I was a Lakers fan, I don't know if I'd be particularly happy with the direction the teams are headed in. Not just this year, but for the foreseeable future. It's not a pretty picture that's being painted.
No, I agree with that. I think if you ask anybody, like, where do you see the Nets in 5 years and where do you see the Lakers in 5 years? Would it be shocking to
It's at the
say that
bottom of the
these are
league.
exactly because the resources are sucked. The moment LeBron retires or decides to leave and go to another team, same thing with Kevin. The moment he retires or decides to go to another team, like these franchises are left with nothing.
They got nothing.
So realistically, it's these two and probably the Clippers that are in like championship or bust mode because they gave up everything to really compete, right? And this is the issue with franchises. But at least the Lakers, they have, the brand value. They keep saying they have the brand value. But even when Kobe retired or in his latter years when no stars really wanted to play there, the Lakers were one of the worst teams in the NBA for a large stretch of, what, 5 years?
And I think like we do have to kind of understand that with player empowerment and this whole movement of sort of reshifting of balance of power in the NBA that's happened in the last decade or so with players, especially star players, holding a lot more power over like personnel, not just personnel decisions, but their own future, where they want to play the situations they want to be in to give themselves the best chance of winning. I think
Hmm.
the model and the formula for building a winning team has kind of trended towards that direction where you kind of do like sell the farm and sell mortgage your future for the best possible shot that you can get today. But we talk about that, and
So
when you really look at today, these teams, I would argue they don't really have a shot today either. Like the Lakers are fighting for a play-in game, and Brooklyn's just praying to God that they can get their three guys on the court at the same time and have them available for a full series before they get eliminated in the first round against Miami if they're an 8 seed, or Chicago, or whoever, Philly if they end up being the 1 seed. Like there is just no favorable. It's one thing to mortgage your future for a better today, but it's another thing to mortgage your future and your today still sucks. And that's the predicament that we're in with both these teams, both in a very similar situation and almost like shockingly similar how they're both stuck with decisions made by management or made for management by the players where they don't really have the power to get out of it now. It is what it is.
I agree with that. And at least like when I mentioned the Lakers were terrible, like the brand value is how they essentially got LeBron James. It's not like he went to a great team, right? It's
Yeah.
that okay, it's in LA, I'm going to go there. So they'll get saved by some superstar down the road eventually wanting to go there because LA is a hot market. Brooklyn, like obviously this was the first time this has happened for them, like where free agents decide to team up and go there. Yeah, I just think like the Lakers will probably be better off. But with these issues or mortgaging the future, like I don't think people realize like it's always a gamble. There's no guarantee you ever win a championship, and now it's always going to be revisionist history. It's like, oh, it didn't pay off. Like at least you'd expect to be competitive, a favorite, and like really showing up in the Western Conference. And that really hasn't shown up for the Lakers. Now at least they have a championship out of it. That's the only year they really dominated and went through the Western Conference. They haven't been a contender. And with Brooklyn, they've only won one playoff series. This is year three of the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving experiment.
Yeah. So it's not looking good for either team.